We get a little more insight on Brian Dumoulin and why he moved on from the Seattle Kraken. Plus, let's explore again what else we need to be a viable contender in Disco Dan's first season.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erica L. Ayala. One day left in Tulsa before I make my way, to a few places, but en route, final destination, Paris, France, to cover the Olympics. But we'll get into that a little bit more. Before I let you know what we're going to talk about today, I want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is doing something amazing, and I'm really leaning into this. You know, if you are a fan of sports like I am, then you're going to love that there are daily deals over at FanDuel, because we've still got WNBA, NWSL, and this little tournament called the Olympics. And FanDuel has got you covered. And later in the episode, I'll tell you exactly some of the odds that I'm taking a look at as someone who will be in Paris, France, and keeping my eyes and ears mostly on the basketball tournaments, but also on the big storylines. All right, if we're meeting for the first time, my name is Erica L. Ayala, been your host of Locked On Kraken since the very, very beginning. But as I mentioned, I'm going to Paris, France. This will be my first Summer Olympics, second Olympics overall. I took some of you everydayers and OGers with me as I covered Maddie Beniers, as well as Sarah Nurse and the rest of the women's and men's hockey tournaments in Beijing, China. That was my first Olympics. I'm going to my second Olympics, both with my own personal company, Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. In addition to having my own emerging media company, I am also a contributor to CBS Sports, where I contribute on the women's basketball side. Of course, that includes WNBA. I've been following Caitlin Clark, got to go to Albany, where she and Iowa took on, of course, Angel Reese and LSU. Now those two will be teammates at the WNBA All-Star Game, which I will be attending. I leave for Phoenix tomorrow. So I know a thing or two about sports, and if you want to follow me or Black Rosie Media to get to know about some of those other sports, you are welcome. But let's get into it. We've got a few topics that honestly I'm pretty excited to talk about. Yesterday I mentioned an article, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but first news of the day is actually an interesting story. I thought it was interesting, where Brian Dumoulin, who of course will be with the Anaheim Ducks this year, he gave just a little bit more about what his thought process was regarding making the move from the Seattle Kraken. Now, he was traded, and actually, if you follow Locked On Kraken on social media, I revived a clip because, we heard from Ron Francis that we were all good after we signed Brandon Montour. We had 7 defensemen. We were going to stick with 7 defensemen, and that was that, right? We didn't need to read into the tea leaves. And then, I don't know if it was even a full 48 hours later, Brian Dumoulin traded. Now, Brian did an interview, and he talks about how he actually was hoping to be traded to an East Coast team at the trade deadline. So this is last season. And obviously that did not happen. He doesn't get really into the details or the particulars. And of course, Anaheim, for those maybe not as familiar with U.S. geography, Anaheim is not on the East Coast. So for whatever reason, that just didn't work out for Dumo. But I found it interesting. And, he's originally from Maine. So there's a lot of reasons, especially later in a career, why a player might want to be closer to home. And Dumo doesn't get into too many particulars in the most recent interview that I was able to actually listen to. I thought it was interesting. So it's a more local paper, I believe, to Maine. And they have a paywall, which I do. Please support local media. And though you could also just listen to the audio without paying for the article. So a little hack there. I mean, if it's available, you got to be smart, right? Anyway, also in the interview, Brian Dumoulin talks about culture. We know that Anaheim, maybe they're in a hybrid rebuild, but likely still in a rebuild. That's kind of my take on it. I think Anaheim would like to be a little further along in their rebuilds, and I don't blame them. They have been a bottom of the barrel team, not just in the Pacific Division, but in the NHL for a while. But he talks about, even though he has experience, playoff experience, Stanley Cup experience, he's not going into Anaheim expecting to immediately be a leader or to take over in any way. He wants to learn the culture of Anaheim and kind of fit and plug and play where he fits in. I thought, though, it was also interesting towards the end of the interview, he also makes it clear that he's not giving up on his career as a professional hockey player. This is not, sometimes you read into the tea leaves. If someone wants to move a little bit closer to home, maybe they're doing it because they want to retire a little bit closer to home. And, Dumo, in this interview at least, he really focuses on wanting to be the right kind of player. And if that means leadership, sure, he'll do that. But he wants to get to know Anaheim, and he wants to settle in also with respect to what he can offer on the ice. He's not done with hockey. He doesn't want to be done with hockey. And, I don't think the article really gives away anything as far as maybe how he felt about leaving Seattle or things of that nature, being traded in the manner that he was. But it again does allude to that Dumo isn't done. And Brian Dumoulin, at the beginning of the season, I've said this before, I wasn't necessarily impressed. I felt that he had a stretch where he was really solid for us. And then again, towards the back end of the season, I think it was a lot of things. If I'm being honest, I feel like maybe there were conversations even above the coaching staff with regard to giving some of the defensemen reps, because we saw Schultz be a healthy scratch, Dumo at times be a healthy scratch. We saw Riker Evans. He was out of the lineup for just a tad bit and then was able to establish himself. We wanted to get him repetitions before inevitably he would go play with the Coachella Valley Firebirds once we knew we were eliminated. I think the writing was kind of on the wall when it came to our defensive core. Justin Schultz, we talked about on yesterday's episode, still not signed, a free agent as of now. Kyler Yamamoto, not a defenseman, but someone also who is a free agent, waiting on Matty Beniers' contract. We spent a lot of time yesterday talking about that. And of course I wish Dumo the best. I would have liked to see maybe him establish himself a little bit more as a leader early on. Now, that's just coming from my perspective. I am very careful, maybe because I'm a New York Liberty fan. If you know what Kelsey Plum said after the finals, then you know. But if you don't know, go listen to Black Rosie Media, because I talk about it there all the time. Anyway, I try not to, unless I know for sure, I don't want to imply what is or isn't happening in the locker room. I don't think that's fair. Team culture can be very touch and go for a lot of different reasons, and not all of it is as sensational as we try to make it, generally speaking. Sometimes you got to fight with your brothers and sisters and your cousins, sometimes your mom and your dad too, just in life. And so, of course, that's going to be the same when you have teams coming together. So anyway, I don't want to speculate, but I do think that Brian Dumoulin could have been more effective earlier on. And maybe some of that is just that he does take a little bit of time to feel out a new situation. And while that is admirable, I do think that it's a fair assumption to make that there are times where when you're a veteran player, the expectation is that it's going to be low maintenance to engage you in things like, at minimum, leadership, but also culture. And players that have a little bit more of a difficult time doing that, I think it can be a tougher road. That's just my interpretation. And I think Brian Dumoulin, he found it a little bit difficult to find his footing. You know who else was like that? Oliver Bjorkstrand. We talked about it. I talked to Ali about it at the All-Star game when I was there in Toronto and got a chance to interview him one-on-one. We had that episode. You can go check it out on our YouTube page or wherever you listen to audio. So I'm wishing Dumo the best. I don't think he was necessarily the right fit. Was he the most egregious, the worst thing? on Seattle? Absolutely not. But this is a team that has to be better. And I said this last season, and it really didn't come to fruition. And I'm hoping it does this year. But again, I mentioned an article yesterday by Mike Farrell. He's a columnist for the Seattle Times. And in the next segment, I'm going to break down what Mike says because it relates a lot to what I've been saying, quite honestly, for the last 3 off seasons for the Seattle Kraken. On the one hand, I find that infinitely frustrating. And on the other hand, there is a little bit of a growth process. I do think that last season was, I think we can say in a lot of ways, a step back. But sometimes you have to take that step back or identify that something's not working, salvage what you can so you can accelerate forward. There's like a saying about an arrow. And anyway, we'll get into that coming up on this episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by our friends at Indeed. Now, what are we talking about in the off season? Of course, we're talking about the roster because you need the right people in the right places to be successful on the ice. And the same goes for business. And so if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 150 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality candidate matches compared to other job sites. Again, according to a recent Indeed survey. So if you need to hire, again, you need Indeed. And listeners of Locked On Kraken will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com. So visit Indeed.com/locked on to redeem that credit. Just go to Indeed.com/LOCKEDON right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions do apply. If you need to hire, then you need Indeed. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, coming to you actually from a really cool place in Tulsa, Cabin Boys Brewery. We do all of, I work here actually. I've got a million jobs if you didn't know, but I work at Cabin Boys and, they do this thing where we get employee points, but they only last for a certain amount of time. And as I already mentioned, I'm going to be on the road. So I had to come get my points today. It's also just kind of a cool, different backdrop. It's a nice day here in Tulsa. So this is a bearded theologian that I'm drinking. It comes in this nice little tulip glass here. I'm actually not drinking this one because I'm recording, but I will be drinking it soon. Also have some water here. Stay hydrated. But if you're ever in Tulsa, Oklahoma, maybe when the Kansas City Mavericks are here, come stop by Cabin Boys. I might be here. I might want to link up with you. I might be working behind the bar. Who knows? Anyway, when you're not listening to Locked On Kraken, make sure you check out Locked On NHL. I love Ann Kimmel and Locked On Predators. I mean, they've got Stamkos, so they're doing amazing work over there. Armando, we had on about a week and a half ago. I mean, when you're the Stanley Cup champions, everything's a celebration. So we've got a lot of amazing hosts in the Locked On NHL ecosystem. And of course, every other Friday, we do the Women's Hockey Spotlight, where I join Gil and Rachel, and we talk about women's hockey. Lots going on with PWHL Minnesota. If you're part of the Black Rosie Media Slack channel, which is absolutely free, at least right now, you know that I have been posting a little bit about that. So anyway, all that to say, I thank you so much for listening. I already got my first response to my kind of unboxing yesterday, and I said I want to pay it forward, so we will do that. But now I want to talk about something else that came across my desk, if you will, and it relates to the article that I said that I really want to focus on. But, the Seattle Kraken need a little bit more. We need to zhuzh up the roster a little bit more. And again, Mike Varel, I love how he opened this article. I mentioned it yesterday. I'm going to read it again today. The good news, the Kraken made 2 moves immediately, of course, referring to Montour and Chandler Stevenson. The bad news, that's not enough. Offense was such a huge problem for the Seattle Kraken last year. If you listen to the show, you know I feel like our defense really wasn't that much to write home about either. And earlier this week alone, I talked about how goaltending has been so inconsistent and people still get heart palpitations when they look at the Philip Grubauer deal. And I mean, honestly, I can't say I blame you. I think Philip Grubauer gets a lot of crap that he probably shouldn't. And I think what's also true is the injury bug has hit hard and hit in really impactful or with players that we thought were going to be impactful. Drieger, Grubauer, and you already know, if you're an everydayer, say it loud and proud right now. I mean, I can't hear you, but I can because you said Andrei Burakovsky. Now, you might not agree with me, but you know how I feel about Berkey. Too many eggs all of our eggs in the Berkey basket. We need to get better on offense. We have to. And this is a quote, and we played this excerpt of Ron Francis during media availability, but I want to read it to you. 2 years ago, we were one of the best teams in the league offensively. Last year, we were one of the worst. The truth is, we're probably somewhere in between. And what did I say during season 2? Whether I was talking to Gil on Locked On NHL, whether I was doing a squad cast with Ann or anyone else, we were arriving early. It wasn't sustainable what we did in season 2. Now, it could be, but we were very conservative with what we were doing at the trade deadline and at free agency. I mean, in the beginning, at the top of this show, the first segment, what did I say? Dumo asked for a trade. And we didn't really do much at the trade deadline, even though we desperately needed to. So, I mean, and of course, you don't want to take a bad deal just to help a guy out. It's got to work out. But I mean, we need more. But this is what Mike says. Today's additions, again, he wrote this after day 1 of free agency. Today's additions of Florida defenseman Brandon Montour and Las Vegas center Chandler Stevenson should help on offense. And that is a big should. But what he also writes is, but like the Kraken, both players enjoyed their best seasons in 22-23, which means the Kraken could use more help. The Kraken could use more help. So that brings me to another article. Oh my, the light is a little fickle right now. But anyway, there we go. That's much better. So that brings me to the next article that I wanted to talk about. About $6 million in cap space. That's not insignificant. But is it enough money to do what the Seattle Kraken need to do to get the offense really activated? It might not be. It might not be today's NHL economy. So that leads me to asking, who are some candidates that could be traded? And I thought this was an interesting list. So this comes from NHL Trade Rumors, and they have 3 players. 2 of them are alternate captains. We haven't had a captain since season 1. And then I was one of the trades that we actually made, Mark Giordano. But anyway, Brandon Tanev is on the list. If you listen to the show, you really shouldn't be surprised by that. I don't know that Brandon Tanev, as much as I love his energy, the way that we are setting up this roster, I don't know that he really has a place. He's also someone else that hasn't been able to stay healthy. Another name that we're seeing on this list that we've talked about before, Yanni Gourde. Now, I told you I like the Gourde centering Eli Tolvanen and Oliver Bjorkstrand. But I also mentioned this in the YouTube comments specifically. I'm really more into the wingers than Yanni Gourde. But similarly to Brandon Tanev, they give you that sandpaper. And so I'm okay with keeping them on the roster. And you need to build around them in order to make things work. So then if you want that sandpaper that they're going to give you and that you need to complement with more finesse scores, then what do? And at least according to NHL trade rumors, and honestly, among the list of these three players, I think this is the player with the most value potentially to other teams, and that's Adam Larsson. Had trade calls made on him throughout most of last season as a big, tough, physical right-handed defenseman. That's hard to find these days. He's also a pending free agent after next season and will make $4 million against the cap. Now, Seattle, that is the Kraken, wouldn't likely have to retain any money in a trade if they end up eating some salary. The price tag is going to increase dramatically. Larsson is a great penalty killer. He blocks a lot of shots and isn't afraid to muck it up in the dirty areas of the ice. There's plenty of teams who could use a right-handed defenseman who can eat 22 minutes a night. We know he's an Iron Man. I'm adding that, of course. The Swedish blue liner will have some say in the matter as he owns a 10-team no-trade clause. Now, that, of course, is the crux here. But again, I think from this list, Larsson has the most value in what I think we need. But you also know that I think we're not a really great defensive team. I had my issues with Larsson in season 1 in particular, but I started to learn his game more. I started, quite honestly, to learn some of our deficiencies a little bit more, and I get it. I get his value to the Kraken, but is his value to the Kraken even more, valuable if we can find someone that can bring us offense? I don't like defense, or I don't like finding offense at the sake of good defense, and that's effectively what I feel we'd be doing if we got rid of Adam Larsson. But again, we're getting close to the writing being on the wall with Brandon Tanev, in my estimation, and maybe Yanni Gourde, depending on how the season goes. And if you wait too long, then we're really not going to find the pieces that we need to make us a contender right away. Let me know. Question of the day. What do you think about the 3 trade options? Brandon Tanev, Yanni Gourde, and Adam Larsson. And do you agree that what we have, at least on paper right now, isn't enough? We'll, of course, continue to discuss this as the offseason continues. But coming up next, I'm going to give you my picks for the game to watch, or the game to watch. I'll give you my pick for the game to watch in March 2024. We'll go over that schedule coming up on today's episode of Locked on Kraken. Mentioned it at the top of the show, but today's episode of Locked on Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now listen. I know the Stanley Cup has been awarded. The Florida Panthers are celebrating till the wee hours of the night, probably. Lots of food pictures, right? Eating out of the cup. Anyway, and if you think that just because the NBA and NHL season is over, that means sports is over, you are wrong, my friend. You are sadly mistaken. And you would be missing out if you didn't take a look at what's happening in the WNBA and, of course, the Olympics. And this is why I love FanDuel. First of all, FanDuel has an Olympics page. They have a women's sports page, and of course, they have a dedicated WNBA page. So if you want to go and look at what are the odds for the gold medal winner in the women's 100 meter, everything from long jump to pole vault, and you have it right there. But you can also take a look at very specific Caitlin Clark odds. Will she score first? Is she an MVP candidate? No. The answer is no. Don't put your money on that bet, folks. I'm just saying. And so many other things. But this is what I love about the FanDuel deal, is that because it is the dog days of summer, every single day they're going to have a deal specific for you. So I want to make sure you're getting the best deals if indeed you do want to bet on sports. So you have to go visit FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, getting ready to come out of their All-Star break. Visit FanDuel.com to look at all of the odds that I mentioned in the WNBA, the Olympics, and so much more. Again, FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and of course, us right here on Locked on Kraken. Hey, thanks as always for making us a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked on Kraken. All right, we talked about Brian Dumoulin. He asked for a trade at the deadline to an East Coast team. The Kraken didn't give it to him at the trade deadline, and then they traded him to Anaheim, not on the East Coast. So make of that what you will, but I thought it was a great interview. I was stumbling. I couldn't remember the outlet, but I have it. It is, again, he's from Maine. So this is the Portland Press Herald, not Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine. So that's a good article. I also talked about 3 candidates potentially for trades. And I told you which one I like the best, although I don't really like any of them. But again, the Seattle Kraken, they have to spice some things up. I mentioned the article from Mike, a columnist over at the Seattle Times. It's entitled, "Why the Kraken Must Add More Offense Despite Wave-Making Moves." And if I'm being honest, the reason they have to do more is because we bombed last season. We absolutely bombed it. There's no way that you can see what happened to the Kraken last year and not want to see more done on the offensive side. And shoring up the power play or special teams, it's going to get you only so far. You need help for Burakovsky. You need help for McCann and Vince Dunn and, yes, Matty Beniers. And right now on paper, I'm not sure we have enough. So anyway, go check that out. But now I want to talk about the schedule. And not only are we going to talk about the schedule, which I have up here if you're watching on YouTube, but now we have the giveaway schedule. So I'm going to stick with our format here. First, I'm going to give you what I like as far as, looking at the March schedule. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the giveaway schedule. So we're taking a look here at the March schedule. You've got 2 games that we come back to CPA, Climate Pledge Arena, play 2 games against Vancouver and Minnesota. If you listen to the show, you know I don't really care for Vancouver very much. They kind of burn my grits, as we sometimes say. Yeah, they definitely do that. But Minnesota, an interesting team. Then we take on Nashville, Philadelphia, and Washington on the road. And then we have Montreal and Utah at home, as well as Winnipeg, then 4 on the road. So this is a start, stop for the Seattle Kraken in March. Chicago, Minnesota again, Edmonton, and Calgary. Then we have Edmonton, Dallas, and Dallas again at home. When it comes to the March schedule, what am I looking at here? Well, I think Utah is a very intriguing team. We talked about that article from The Athletic where it's which one of these teams has improved the most, and The Athletic really likes what Utah has done. Is it going to be enough? I guess that's the question that everyone's asking, but I like what they've done. But for me, I honestly think it's the 2 games at the end of the season against Dallas. Now, that's going to be the closest that we have to kind of like a playoff series. And again, I said really by the end of, on the earlier side, November, but definitely by December, we should know what this team is all about, barring any significant injuries, which, of course, we can never bar. It's the Seattle Kraken, am I right? So we always have to keep that as a consideration. And, I mean, it's sports. It's pro sports. It's hockey. But by March, I want us to really be the team, the early stages of the team that we're going to be in the postseason. Not if we make the postseason, but when we get there. Because how much is one season make or break? I mean, depending on who you are in the organization, apparently last season was make or break for Dave Axtell. Am I right? I think you got to be thinking that if things don't work out, Ron Francis, his days are numbered. And we'll know this in theory, right, by March. But I really want to see how this team is going to make the small adjustments day in, day out. We've got 2 against Dallas. I like that. So that's my game to watch. That's what I'm going to be keeping an eye on. So anyway, that's my pick in March. The 2 games at the end of March against Dallas. I want us to be the best version of Seattle that we've seen all season. And why is that? Because by the time we get to, let me just pull this up for you. I mean, I'm giving a little tease here, but we're away for basically all of April. 2 home games in April. So not just for you fans. I get to see the Seattle Kraken every time they enter Climate Pledge Arena. But that's a team that they got to get wins at home. We've talked about that a lot. And they got to be a fine-oiled machine. If not before, certainly by the end of March. I want us to be in playoff position. I want us to have a good cadence with our goaltending. I want us to know what our scoring options are, while also knowing who our X factors can be that are willing to really push and do a lot of different work. We need to know that by March, if not sooner. But it has to be in good position by the end of March if we want a chance to make a playoff run. And hopefully, again, we'll have put in enough work where we're still a contender, if not guaranteed a spot. That's our show. Again, be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. Tomorrow's episode and Friday's episode will continue. So tomorrow we'll go through the April schedule. I gave you a little tease just now. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about the schedule. We're going to talk about the Coachella Valley schedule. And eventually, I'll give you some of the Kansas City Mavericks schedule as well. I went over that briefly. They're not in Tulsa nearly as much as I would like, but we'll do all of that. So be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. And loud and proud, we say always and forever, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.